Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Sunday School. It's good to see everybody. We're going to gather here for just a couple minutes while y'all find us on Facebook and YouTube, respectively. But great to be with you this morning. I'm delighted to be joined this morning by Father Keith and by Zoe Holmes. How are y'all doing this morning?
Doing great, my friend.
Just
Hi,
fine,
Zoe.
thanks. How are you all?
Doing good. Praying for some rain.
Indeed.
We need it.
Rain is a good thing. I want to ask y'all while we're gathering, what secrets do you have for the spring forward business? Because it used to be I had to remember when to turn it and all that kind of stuff, but now like my car remembers to do it for me. I used to have an old car. It didn't remember. So then I have to like find some device that doesn't spring forward. And then I have to hold on to it like my Lodestar to make sure that like I can keep track of like what time it actually is, so I don't end up just getting anxious and showing up at the church at like 4 a.m. or something like that.
Well, my secret is I just go outside and I take the sundial I have in the backyard and I just turn it a little bit. Works every time.
I'm not sure I have any secrets. All of the clocks in the kitchen have to be reset by hand, though, so I kind of wait till I go to sleep or I'm ready to go to bed before I change them.
Exactly.
We have some that it's so hard anymore to like figure out which ones are the ones that are going to be smarter than me. Everybody joining us, we want to give shout outs this morning to Tanya, Karen Morrison. Hey, good lookings. Hey there, Karen, back at you. Karen Petty too. Lynn Flynn, good to see you. Good morning. Hope you're having a good morning with your coffee or whatever gets you going when it's a little earlier than you maybe think it should be.
Well, I will say, Jonathan, I know what you're saying. I know that iPhones don't do it automatically now, but I couldn't help but look at it and reset my alarm for this morning just because I still don't quite trust it. I know it's smarter than I am, but it's like I'd almost rather manually do it to know that it's happened, but it's easy to forget that too. But yeah, so I get your nervousness on that. But I am glad it's here. I'm probably one of the few people who like it just because I like the later evenings.
Me too.
I really do. Get more things done in the evening. It's just nice.
Well, it's awful in the wintertime when it gets dark before 5 o'clock. I just really hate that.
But I have to ask, and other people can chime in, and it's not that I want death of anything, but how come quite a few of my plants died because of this cold weather, even with protection? But then when I was outside late last night, all of a sudden I saw little gnats going around. I'm like, are you kidding me? You can kill a tree, but you can't kill a gnat. I mean, it's like, oh, come on. So I hope the mosquito population will be down this year. We'll see.
Good morning, Terry. I hope Sophie had a good swim this morning. I saw y'all following the streams, which is exciting that you can do that now. Yeah, it's weird, the fragility of things this time of year. And I still get a little upset that you can go from 6 inches of ice and stuff to needing Flonase the next day. That doesn't seem possible.
All those flowering trees on my walk yesterday, the red buds are coming out and the pear trees. And it's like, I can't believe just a couple of weeks ago we were in a deep freeze.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
It really
I'm so
is.
surprised. Rebecca was telling me last night some of her, I was going to say crops, some of her garden things are starting to come up. It's like, how is that? I said the freeze didn't kill it. She said, no, I planted it after the freeze. And it's just amazing how quickly that whole cycle happens.
It really is. And in my garden now, because I don't know what's going to die and what's going to live, but all of a sudden it's breaking through. You see things and it's like, oh man, that made it, but I also worry about, I have a pomegranate tree and it really got damaged 2 years ago where it bloomed. It was looking great. And then we got one of those late freezes, at the end. And oh man, so a few of the twigs actually have leaves. So now I'm like praying, okay, come on. But I got to be ready to somehow protect it if that happens again. So, because they're beautiful. I am trying to find us on Facebook, and I am having a hard time. What's going on? Usually just pops right up for me.
Well, as you look and as folks continue to gather, I want to give our gathering folks our question of the morning. And we're going to come back to the good Archbishop of Canterbury. But we are, what is this, Lent 4 weeks in? Next week is Lent 5. The next week is Palm Sunday. So we are 2 weeks from today from Palm Sunday. And it's one of those things where like Lent feels like this insurmountable mountain, and then you find yourself with just a couple weeks left. And so the question I'm curious about as we continue to gather, and I see, good morning, Sally and Betty, those who have joined us in the last couple seconds. What has emerged in this season of Lent so far for you? It could have something to do with this class, the Lord's Prayer. It could have something to do with anything. What has God shown you? So we're just going to leave that up, and we're going to check in on those comments as you feel led to share them before we go to the presiding or the Archbishop of Canterbury's Lord's Prayer to officially get us going.
Oh, by the way, it's also official Pie Day.
Pie Day I can get behind, 3/14.
Yeah.
I like it.
I can't believe I was wearing that shirt yesterday and forgot that it was today. That's sad. Oh, come on, where is it?
The day I can't really get behind is the Star Wars Day. And I don't know if it's because I enjoy the Star Wars movies, but the May the 4th thing. And then somebody said, at least in this country where we do the month first, it's 5/4. So it's like Dave Brubeck Day. And that sealed it for me. Like I have no allegiance or loyalty to the Star Wars thing, but Dave Brubeck I can get behind. So the kids roll their eyes when I said, "Do you know what day it is?" And like, "Yeah, May the 4th be with you." I'm like, "No, we're gonna listen to some good jazz." So I'm curious for both of you, and I know we didn't talk about this, so if you don't have an answer, that's fine too. But has anything been emerging in the season of Lent for you so far?
Still looking for us on here.
Well, for me, I think it's just been focus on family with Steve being sick and all. I've sort of been distracted from Lent, unfortunately.
Oh, for sure. And there's a sense in which sometimes like Lent calls us to parts of life that are part of life, but they're not part of life for us right now. And there's sometimes when like the parts of life that Lent calls us to are where we already are in a way that is it sometimes can feel redundant. I know, and I certainly think of that, Zoe, when I think of Steve and y'all right now in this season. I remember my first couple of Maundy Thursdays after becoming a parent, and Maundy Thursday is still one of my favorite services, but the whole foot washing thing seemed a lot less magical or mysterious because I'm like, well, shoot, when you're a parent, like every night is Maundy Thursday. We're wiping feet and butts and everything else, and like,
yes, that's true.
But I think there's something to that back and forth where sometimes it just isn't when you're trying to like orchestrate being present to realities we can't change and that sort of thing. Sometimes like life reminds you don't need to orchestrate it, and it's just being present to the life that is. Oh, good. We have at least one more Brubeck fan watching today. Betty says she can get behind the Brubeck 5/4 thing. Good morning, Sheila. It's good to see you too.
Yes, hi guys. Sally, hello. Linda, Terry, great to see you guys.
I know this class, I don't know that it's been attached to any insights about the Lord's Prayer for me, but just this class has really helped me in my morning prayers and I've been so grateful for Zoe's redirecting me to the little St. Clair Mission app that has become our little touch point in the morning. Thea and I eating breakfast together, but it's really helped me slow down with the Lord's Prayer, just to kind of. And it's weird. There's a kind of slowing down that I can't just tell myself to do, but I can't just say, okay, this is the Lord's Prayer, slow down. But when I'm engaged in an ongoing conversation like this one over 3, 4, 5 weeks, I get to those words and I'm not necessarily thinking more about them. I'm just holding them in a different way, if that makes sense. And I've been grateful for that.
I want to thank you also, Zoe, because I was using St. Clair Mission for years, and something happened to the app and it wasn't working anymore. So I left it and went to something else, and Jonathan told me what you said. So I said, wait a minute, it's working again. So I went back to it, and it is. I love Mission St. Clair.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. You can spend as much or as little time as you want to with it, which is great when you're rushing around like crazy.
So thank you for letting him know that, because I have really missed it.
It's a beautiful thing.
It is. And that's Mission St. Clair, guys, if y'all are listening. Really highly recommend it.
Good morning, Susan. All right. Well, we're going to ask the presiding, I keep saying presiding. It's hard when you've got all these different titles and stuff. We're going to ask the Archbishop of Canterbury to start us off with our Lord's Prayer, and then we're going to touch base. Today we have kind of a two-step. We're going to follow up on the last class where we ended on the petitions about forgiveness, and then we're going to look at some of the in some ways really challenging petitions to understand about where we ask God to not lead us into temptation, to deliver us from evil. So that's kind of what's on the docket today. We're going to disappear our All right. We're going to do that in a second. I figured out what it was, though. We're trying to follow the conversation, everybody on Facebook and also on YouTube. But in order to have the YouTube up, I have to have it on another tab. So I had muted Facebook or muted YouTube, so we didn't have like 2 or 3 of them. So then it ended up. Anyway, I figured out what it was, though. So that's what was going on there. All right, we can figure this out. Let's do this.
Yeah, you're back. You're on Facebook now.
Yeah. No, I figured out the issue, but we want to be able to hear the Archbishop, and that means I've got to all right, I'm gonna have to get off of that. All right, let's see if it'll work. feel good about it this time. All right, we're going to disappear and give the presiding bishop another chance.
Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name.
Thy kingdom come.
Thine will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day
our daily bread.
Forgive us our trespasses,
as we forgive those
who sin against us.
And lead us not into temptation.
deliver us from evil.
For thine is the kingdom,
and power and glory
forever and ever. Amen. Amen.
Amen.
All right, so now we're going to circle back to the question that is kind of the question that our check-in question in the comments for those who'd like to share what's emerged in this season of Lent for you. And we'll be circling back to that throughout our conversation today. Also want to just kind of give our quick 6-part recap. The author breaks down the Lord's Prayer into 6 sections: heaven, earth, bread, forgiveness, temptation, and glory. And this is like our little map at the mall kiosk. So like, you are here. This is where we are today. We are looking at the tail end of forgiveness and temptation. And we were looking at the Lord's Prayer last week in terms of petitions: hallowed, come, be done, give, forgive, lead, deliver. And so this is where we are too. That's just kind of by way of orienting ourselves again today. So I'm going to pull down our slides, get our faces on here. Now, Zoe, you were very patient and showed a great amount of trust when we were collecting questions at the very beginning, back a few weeks ago. One of the questions you had was about the verbs and the agency of, like, what sense does it make that we pray that God would not lead us into temptation? What does that suggest? And we said, hold that thought. And then lo and behold, there are a couple of chapters that kind of just like slow down and really explore that and honor that question in a big way. And so I invited you kind of last minute last night to come in and join us for that, to see sort of your take on the author's reflections on that, if it feels satisfactory or what questions that leaves still unanswered. But really grateful for your coming on to join the conversation. First of all, just to be present to it, but also especially knowing that this is a question that was particularly jumping out to you at the very beginning. So I'm grateful for that. First, we're going to kind of just touch base on forgiveness. And we went into this more in detail last time, but of course we've made the connection between giving. We ask God to give us this day our daily bread, and there's a dailiness, there's a trust, there's a sense that you can only be loved today, so that you can come to trust that the God who loves you today will love you tomorrow. But there's a waking up to the new day and experiencing that trust and that love all over again. And that we sometimes find that trust hard to live into. And so we end up acting out that mistrust against our neighbors. So give and then forgive. And then the author really spent a lot of time trying to be clear that it's not a conditional forgiveness. And how do y'all, Keith and Zoe, and maybe we'll start with you, Keith. What kind of jumped out at you in the way the author kind of breaks down that they're related, like my forgiveness of my neighbor is related to God's forgiveness of me, but it's not purely conditional in that transactional sense.
Absolutely. One of the things I'm going to talk about very briefly today in my sermon goes with that, and it's something we should look at Lent. But I think sometimes we think that every action that we do or trying to get closer to God is for salvation. And that's already happened. And the beauty of that, it doesn't mean, oh, then I don't have anything to do. It's actually the opposite. It's something we don't have to worry about. So therefore, it's the relationship. It is coming closer to God, the love affair with God, that we can actually focus on, not just save my life, but actually having a swim with God versus throw me, a life preserver. And so in saying that, Jesus, talks over and over about loving our neighbor and loving one another. So in that reflection, one of the ways that I can love God is by loving you. Because then I'm loving someone in the image of God or through God, the eyes of God. And so that love for one another is another way for us to, matter of fact, an extremely important way to love God. This is something that we've talked about in the past where people are, quote, very, very religious, but they use people, they are mean, and all this and how can you do that to something that is the reflection of God? In this world, you're doing it to God. And Jesus says, whatever you do to this person, you do to me. Whatever you do to this little one, that's all of us, right? In that lap, it's all of us. Whatever you do to them, you're doing to me. He goes on to say, when I was naked, you clothed me. When I was in jail, you came to visit me. When I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. Once again, that's what he's is those who we're taking care of out there. Did I break up?
Yeah.
No, I think we got you back, Keith, but you did break up a little bit. But we got the gist of what you were saying, and yeah, that's absolutely spot on. And I love your reminder that salvation isn't this thing that salvation has already happened. Salvation is something already true of us, and it makes me think with respect to forgiveness and sin of the reconciliation of a penitent and the practice of confession in the Episcopal Church. And I remind folks, especially folks coming to their first confession, teenagers or kids, we go through the liturgy of it in the prayer book. There's no page that says God doesn't forgive you. And that's one of the things the author makes a great distinction between, it may not be appropriate for someone, for me, a human creature, to forgive or expect forgiveness willy-nilly from a neighbor I've sinned against greatly. And he goes into specific instances of abuse and trauma. And so that's one of the ways he points to the language use in Luke's gospel. Forgive as we are forgiving or are learning to forgive. It's a process for us. It's not a process for God. It's different for God. That forgiveness is already true. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this too.
Well, excuse me. As you may know, I'm a language major and a linguistics student. So I was very interested in what he had to say about the verbs, because the idea of the difference between pardon and forgiveness, the fact that pardon is an authority figure giving pardon to someone who has committed evil and maybe giving him a second chance, in other words, whereas forgiving is something that is ongoing, and we do it as one to another of our minor things that happen to us, because we live in community, and we should always be aware of the fact that community requires some trust and some love, and because we live in community, we ought to be able to forgive the minor little things that are done to us over the course of time. But like you, I was really interested in the fact that he went into very deeply the fact that there are certain things that are injustices, that are abuses, that are just impossible, or very, very hard to forgive. And maybe they shouldn't be forgiven. Maybe they need to be brought to justice from some higher authority, but that's not up to us. That's up to somebody else to do that. Whereas we are in a process of trying to come to terms with what has been done to us by this other person. It really it really gave a lot of clarity to me because for the longest time, I mean, the conditional forgive and be forgiven, we're forgiven as we forgive others, is a little bit hard. It's hard to understand and it's difficult to take because, we think, well, if this is conditional, then God doesn't love me. If I've sinned and done something to my neighbor that I shouldn't have done, and I don't seek God's forgiveness right away and the forgiveness of the other person, then God's not going to forgive me. And that's just not the case. And that was kind of a big sigh of relief for me.
Absolutely.
The whole idea of the differences between trespass and the historical background of trespass and debt, and then sin, and how sin has two meanings in the current day. I mean, all of that was very instructive. And I thought in particular, these chapters were probably among my favorites in this book. That I thought I got more out of it than anything else.
When you were saying that about forgiveness of the lesser things and how it just kind of belongs to community or kind of comes along with community, reminds me of when Rebecca and I were dating. At one point, we were having a night together, like watching a ball game or something, and she was very quiet. And I asked the question that dating couples sometimes, I was like, hey, is everything okay? And like, is it us? And she's like, yeah, it is. And I was like, oh. So she has my attention in a different kind of way. And I was like, what's going on? And she said, I really enjoy you and I love you. And I'm aware that to get closer together will mean my hurting you. And I don't want to hurt you. And so I think there's not to, and she's not the kind of person who would hurt anybody intentionally, but she knew that intimacy and vulnerability mean, like, life and community means forgiveness is necessary. So forgiveness isn't just sort of a little bit of the extra that we need just in case, like the Band-Aids that you hide away and take on a hiking trip in case somebody sprains an ankle or gets a scrape. Like, it's essential to being able to have a family life together or the life of faith together in the church. It's I think of that often as we celebrate the Eucharist. Like, the forgiveness is poured into the cup, and it's at the heart of the expectation of what we will need in order to really grow into our belonging to one another. Well, thanks for that overcapping review, guys. Lots still to say about forgiveness, but it can be, I love, on the one hand, if there's a huge injustice, either experienced personally or socially, kind of take the pressure off of this forgiveness, or God doesn't love you. But on the other hand, normalizing forgiveness as not extraordinary, but expected for those who live in the life of faith together. So now we're on to temptation. And I don't know about y'all, but at the beginning, I just could not help but think about the Screw Tape letters and C.S. Lewis. And I wanted to share just a short passage, and then we'll get into a little bit of the agency of leading and all of those good questions. But we're looking at the Lord's Prayer and the petition about temptation. And let me just start up here on page 147. The best response to temptation is not to attempt to avoid it altogether. That is an unlivable solution that ultimately turns us in on ourselves, itself a traditional description of what it is to be trapped in sin. Rather, we must learn how to live with it without being either frightened of it or overwhelmed by it. Avoidance has huge costs, and to put it bluntly, the kingdom isn't going to come, never mind the kingdom, because people steer clear of temptations by avoiding this world. So he's talking about kind of a spiritual escapism. For most of us, most of the time, life is spiritually difficult in complex and subtle ways. Just as a burglar will not try to look like a burglar or carry a bag labeled swag, the tempter will not come to us dressed in a Satan outfit. The tempter works by stealth, and the most difficult to resist temptations will be those that slip unnoticed into our minds and hearts, using respectable channels, insinuating themselves into our most high-minded goals and aspirations. And this is the context for this clause of the Lord's Prayer. The previous one was realistically based on the appreciation that we would, at the time of praying, be in God's debt because of our sin and failure. This petition involves turning our attention to the future and bringing before God our desire and intention not to run up such excessive debts in the future. It is focused on the dark and difficult side of the hours and days yet to come, and brings into focus the expectation that as time goes by, we will get things wrong, embarrassing or shaming ourselves in the process, and sometimes, alas, hurting, harming, or betraying others. And we pray this petition, not hoping that we will be able to avoid all temptation, but that we will sometimes at least not succumb to it. Zoe, what were your thoughts and reflections, either on that passage or reading these chapters on temptation? And we'll save your agency question for just a couple minutes.
Well, I'm just, I guess always the words "lead us not into temptation" have always been a problem for me, because I don't feel like God leads us into temptation, and the idea that that we're asking God to deliver us from the time of trial, maybe, or that we are, do not let us fall into temptation, make us aware that that's there and help us to overcome it without being overcome ourselves. I think these particular chapters did lend some clarity to that for me. And I guess for the longest time, I knew that in the Pope, for example, has suggested that we say, "Do not let us fall into temptation." And that is certainly what the Spanish prayer says. And to me, that's always been easier for me to understand than the whole idea of "lead us not into temptation." Once again, I'm a linguist, and the verbs were a problem for me. So I thought these chapters really helped to clarify that quite a bit.
And on that point of the verb, the active part on page 151, I love that he looks to other scriptures to gain some insight about how the language might function there, how we'd understand it. He says, one response is that there are other biblical prayers that express things negatively like this. When we come across the words, "Do not take your Holy Spirit from me" in Psalm 51, we do not imply that we believe that God has a plan to do that. The point rather is to express our dread of the prospect. And I love how he gives us permission to feel the language a little differently that way.
Well, somebody once said to me, if you feel like you're alienated from God, guess who moved?
There you go. Right.
And I think, that helps to lend some clarity to the whole "lead us not into" verbiage as well. Because there is that tendency, of course, to be distracted by the world to the extent that we turn our attention to things that are not godly, that are not things that we should be paying attention to if we want to lead a life in the model of Jesus. I don't know. That's pretty much all I have to say about that.
Father Keith, what do you make of his contention? Because I get that like God doesn't lead us into temptation, but I'm also appreciating that what he says about, if I just try to avoid temptation by myself, I'm going to miss that, because temptation is not the devil with a sign and horn. Temptation comes in goals and aspirations. Like when I think I'm at my best, there might be something snuck in there. And that's where I was thinking about the Screw Tape letters over this past week, because Screw Tape talking to the young Wormwood, or vice versa, I get them mixed up, but talking about you don't have to be obvious. You can be subtle. You can just like infect someone's piety. Why is it so hard to, or why is it a lost cause to try to avoid temptation by ourselves?
Well, first of all, if it was the devil horns and a sign, that would be awesome, because then we'd know to avoid it. And it never comes like that. It always comes in what we think may be beauty, or sometimes it's even in the beauty of things that happen. I had a priest that sent me to seminary who told me one time, be very careful, because when things are starting to go well at the church, that's when things can come up, and temptation or angers and things like that to break it apart. And there's a lot of truth behind that. And as a matter of fact, I'll be talking a little bit more about this in my sermon, so I want to be real careful I don't jump into that. But God himself is not taking us here. I'm going to take you here to be tempted. There's a lot of different ways of looking at that. So it's absolutely right. It is. I love that. Don't let us fall into temptation, because it is us. A lot of times temptation is attractive even when we know it's not supposed to be attractive, and yet we take it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where, and I'll be talking today about the poisons of the world, the poison and sin of the world. Even when we know we shouldn't touch the apple, we do, right? Or the fruit from the tree, we do. It's been from the very beginning of time. And so I think it is. I love that, about don't let us fall into temptation. But I think that God is still with us even in that temptation and loving us. We see in the story of God's love for us over and over and over. If you pick up, people want to read the Bible, read it. In the Old Testament, of how they become disobedient to God over and over, and yet God is there. God continues to say, okay, let's do this to help y'all out. Let's help, and yet we turn around and we complain and we get upset. And so there's that temptation of anger, walking away from God, all these other things. So anyway, I'll stop. I could go on. I'll stop.
So on page 153, there's a wonderful summary that gets at some of what both of y'all have said. It says, lead us not, doesn't mean don't take us there. It's too late for that. So it's not just that God is the one who leads us there. We're already there, because this world is full of troubles and tribulations, tests and temptations. They're already on their way. It means don't just dump or abandon us there, or do not leave us to our own devices, for we fear that we will be overwhelmed and destroyed. And I love that twofold recognition, that it's not just that God doesn't lead us into that stuff, but like, if you think temptations are out there, the tempter in some ways has already done a little bit of deception and trick. Like it's already on us, and we're already in the world of needing God's grace and relying on forgiveness.
Well, I think that if we look at the leading itself, I think that's only happened once, and that was God did that to God's self in Jesus Christ, when Jesus is hurled into the wilderness for temptation. And so that may be where we're seeing that, of wanting to say, don't lead us into temptation. But the only time that's happened is when it was Christ. God himself in the flesh does, puts himself into temptation. But for the rest of us, you're right. We're already there. God doesn't have to lead us into any temptation. We are pretty darn good at it ourselves.
So now I want to segue us a little bit for these final minutes into the conversation about the evil one. If the devil doesn't come with horns and hooves and all that kind of stuff, there's this whole question of like, well, what does just the first page on 60 of his identifying, Stephen Cherry's identifying three main struggles. He says, many modern people will feel some discomfort in thinking in terms of a personal devil. There are good reasons for this. First, there are those who might use the devil as the explanation of their actions and thereby seek to evade responsibility, as in the devil made me do it. Second, there is the sheer embarrassment experienced when others hear that we hold to such a childish or primitive view, especially if the devil is imagined with cloven hooves and horns and carrying a pitchfork. Third, there is the more sophisticated concern of dualism. Dualism is the belief that there is some kind of equivalence or parity between God and the devil. The one good and wise, the other malicious and cunning. And that's kind of like the old cartoon with an angel and a devil, one on each shoulder. And then in the chapter, which I won't pretend to just like, I don't want to spoil the whole thing. So we'll leave the author to say some of it in his own words. But he speaks to each of these really powerfully. Like, our embarrassment doesn't prove or disprove anything in terms of the devil's reality. But he also, he kind of points to a really Augustinian, because Augustine was the big one who emphasized this instinct in terms of thinking about good and evil. So evil is real, but it's not sort of this balancing opposite of God. And the image that Augustine used came to mind in this chapter a lot. Augustine talked about evil as a whole in a fabric. And because I knit a lot, that's a really powerful image for me. A whole is real, and a whole is nothing at the same time. So it's a distortion. It's a rip. So God has made good things, and then in a rip, that's where you see, and that's where the Christian language of mending becomes so powerful. Reconciliation is a kind of mending. So if you don't believe in holes, your feet still might get cold if your socks have them. But if you look at what a hole is, it's a real thing that is a no thing. It's a nothing. And its nothingness is exactly what names its sadness as far as a departure intended. What did y'all, what were some of the things that jumped out at you considering the Christian tradition of trying to name what it is when we're wrestling with evil?
You mean the actual sin or the? Sorry.
The idea of what evil is.
Because I will say that one of the things that's very important for us is to name the actual sin in our life. And the reason is the way to work on that or to get closer to God is to actually name it, because Jesus shows us with demons. What is your name? Because the very first thing you have to do is know what you're dealing with. I agree with you. There's denominations and others that when I was growing up that love to throw blame on Satan all the time. Satan did this or the devil did this. And you're right. That ends up becoming a scapegoat because it means that I didn't do it. Somebody else did. And the truth is we need to actually take claim for what we've done and name it. Here's the sin. Here's what I've done. Father, forgive me. And then truly work on it. If we're repenting on something, we need to truly work on that. And so that's I think the big part of naming. And I did see Zoe laugh because of the devil made me do it. I know exactly who you were thinking of.
Of course.
Flip Wilson.
Yep.
So it's a very good point he makes in the book.
I really like the discussion of negativity as well. I thought that, when you're talking about dualism, not really being God is one thing and devil is another thing and they're equal to one another, that's not the case. But the whole idea of negativism, when we fail to say the right thing, or we fail to keep our mouth shut when we shouldn't say anything, or it's always the negative aspects. And when I think about over the years, over some people in my life who have been really negative, and I think what that does is just cause the other person, in my case, me, to think ill of myself, to think that I can't do anything right, that I can't have a relationship that I would like to have that's more godly because I'm simply not up to the task. And to me, that's the devil. That's the negative part of it. It's not somebody with horns and a pitchfork, but just when I turn away from God and look to other things that are not God.
And negativity can spread like wildfire. It's so easy to get caught into negativity, and it is a bad place to be. And then it ends up feeding, because you're absolutely right, especially when people are negative towards you, it does make you feel like you're not worthy or you're not able to function. And so then that causes negativity coming out and spreading to others, right. In which we should be supporting one another versus beating each other down. But a lot of times when we are in a bad place, or we are low self-esteem, or people have done that, we will lash out at others, and it ends up being a cycle that becomes toxic and dangerous and poisonous, and it doesn't do anybody any good. So I think all three of us have dealt with that so many times in our life, all the time, actually. Well,
it's a constant reminder to me to turn to the Bible and to read the Gospels, and especially some things that Paul has said over the years, over his letters, that I'm a child of God, and I have to continue to remind myself of that. And so I do have worth, no matter what somebody outside of me says to me that's negative. I have to keep reminding myself that God is with me and the Holy Spirit is guiding me, and I am worthy.
Absolutely, because you don't know what that person was bringing to the table. That actually, and this is why when people come and they are very negative towards me, and I know it's hard to believe, but yes, it happens all the time. I'm actually praying a lot of times, because a lot of times people aren't angry with you over this or that. There's something so much deeper. And I learned that actually when I was in college. I had a fraternity brother who just chewed me out about something. I can't even remember what it was, but then got personal and really beat me down. I was the president of the fraternity and really just beat me down hard. And it really upset me for a long time. And it was about 6 months later, they came back and said, I want to apologize for what I said to you. Here's what I was going through. And that's what it was. It was, they were beating me down because they were hurt. So I learned from there.
And it's a really great reminder, and maybe this is where we'll close. I'm looking at the time too, and we want to give folks a chance to get to service. But I'd like to silence the tongue when we are on the verge of participating in that negativity by like ripping a hole in the fabric of someone's well-being, but also in the same way that we aren't being led into temptation because temptation is already there. Sometimes we're tempted to exaggerate a tear, but sometimes we just find ourselves in the midst of tears. And I think of St. Paul's definition of what makes a gift good in the church, and it's that twofold definition that the church has hung on to and celebrated. One, it's glory to God, and two, it's for the building up of God's people. And so I think of like the opposite of negativity might have aspects of encouragement, that building up, where instead of, but in addition to not contributing to the rending of garments, to be a proactive, like just assuming that we all have holes and that we need each other to remember the foundational identity we carry as beloved children of God. And we can be that voice to one another as we encourage each other along the way. Well, thank you. Thank you both. Thank you all who watched along with us today. This was a great conversation. I'm really grateful for you.
It's a wonderful book. It's very, very good. And I'm so happy that you turned us on to it so that we could read it for ourselves, because I got a great deal out of it. I thank you.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad for that. So we have one more conversation. Lent is not quite over. So we're going to be visiting glory next week. And we have just one topic, it's glory. So we're going to have some room for sort of y'all's concluding observations, those of you at home who've been following on the journey or those who are just brand new to it. Either one, we're going to have some space for questions and conversation, and then we'll be looking at glory. All right, we will see you next time.
Okay. Bye.
Blessings, guys. See y'all at service. Peace.